Hey guys, and welcome to day 23 of Lent, well over halfway there now. Today we're looking at loving your enemies, and we're looking at this in Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 27 to 36. This is my word, Jesus continued. For those of you who are listening, love your enemies, do good to people who hate you, bless people who curse you, pray for people who treat you badly. If someone hits you on the cheek, offer him the other one. If someone takes away your coat, don't stop him taking your shirt. Give to everyone who asks you, and don't ask for things back when people have taken them. Whatever you will want people to do to you, do that to them. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Think about it. Even sinners love people who love them. Or again, if you do good only to people who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Sinners do that. If you lend only to people who expect to get things back from, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to people to get paid back. No. Love your enemies. Do good and lend without expecting any return. Your reward will be great. You will be children of the highest. He is generous, you see, to the stingy and wicked. You must be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. One of the greatest Jewish scholars to write about Jesus in the modern age was David Flusser, who taught for many years at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But not everyone approved of his scholarship, and one of his most brilliant students visiting a university elsewhere was once given a very low mark by the professor simply because of being associated with Flusser himself. Then, sometime later, a student of the other professor came to study with Flusser. His work was not very good, but Flusser insisted on grading it with an A. His teacher assistant protested. How could he do that, particularly after what that other professor had done? Give him an A, insisted Flusser. This I have learned from Jesus. The kingdom that Jesus preached and lived was all about a glorious, uproarious, absurd generosity. Think of the best thing you can do for the worst person and go ahead and do it. Think of what you'd really like someone to do for you and do it for them. Think of the people to whom you are tempted to be nasty and lavish generosity on them instead. These instructions have a fresh, spring-like quality. They are all about new life bursting out energetically like flowers growing through concrete and startling everyone with their colour and vigour. But are they achievable? Well, yes and no. Jesus' point was not to provide his followers with a new rule book, a list of do's and don'ts that you could tick off one by one, and sit back satisfied at the end of a successful model day. The point was to inculcate and illustrate an attitude of heart, a lightness of spirit in the face of all that the world can throw at you. And at the centre of it is the thing that motivates and gives colour to the whole. You are to be like this because that is what God is like. God is generous to all people, generous in the eyes of the stingy to a fault. He provides good things for all to enjoy, the undeserving as well as the deserving. He is astonishingly merciful. Anyone who knows their own heart truly and still goes on experiencing God's grace and love will agree with this. How can we, his forgiven children, be any less? Only when people discover that this is the sort of God that they are dealing with will they have any chance of making this way of life their own. In fact, this list of instructions is all about which God you believe in and about the way of life that follows as a result. We must admit with shame that large sections of Christianity down the years seem to have known little or nothing of the God Jesus was talking about. Much that has called itself by the name of Jesus seems to have believed instead in a gloomy God, a penny-pinching God, a God whose only concern is to make life difficult and salvation nearly impossible. But by the same token, this passage gives the lie to an old idea, which was around in Jesus' day as well as in our own, that all religions are really the same, that all gods are really variations on the same theme. This God is different. If you lived in a society where everyone believed in this God, there wouldn't be any violence, there wouldn't be any revenge, there wouldn't be any divisions or class or caste. Property and possessions wouldn't be nearly as important as making sure your neighbour was all right. Imagine if even just a few people around you took Jesus seriously and lived life like that. Life would be exuberant, different, astonishing. People would stare. And of course, people did stare when Jesus did it himself. The reason why crowds gathered was that the power was flowing out of Jesus and people were being healed. His whole life was one of exuberant generosity, giving all he'd got to give everyone who needed it. He was speaking of what he knew, the extravagant love of his Father, the call to live a lavish human life in response. And finally, when they struck him on the cheek and ripped the coat and shirt off his back, he went on loving and forgiving. He didn't show love only to his friends, but to his enemies, weeping over the city that had rejected him, his plea for peace. He was the true embodiment of the God of whom he spoke. So for reflection today, reflect on the contrast between Jesus' perception of God and the perception held by some sections of Christianity throughout history. How can you cultivate an attitude of heart and a lightness of spirit that reflect the generosity and mercy of God? I'd love to see in the comments of any instances, we don't need to name names of course, of times where you've loved somebody who hasn't loved you, or you've given something to somebody who you don't expect anything from, or hasn't given anything to you, or even someone that's been horrible to you in some way or some kind of shape or form, and how you've treated them in return with love, like Jesus is commanding us to do, as difficult as it is. And tell me what your difficulties with doing that are. And in what practical ways can you demonstrate love, forgiveness and generosity to others, even when it seems difficult or goes against social norms? Kind of along the lines of what I was just saying. But I'd love to hear what you guys think on all of that, and some of your stories as well. Okay, have a nice day.